happens when a superpower suddenly loses its eyes. That is exactly what the Russian military experienced in late August and mid-September, when two of its most critical logistical hubs went up in flames. Within just 20 nights, Ukraine delivered twin precision strikes that paralyzed Moscow's drone operations and ammunition supply across the Eastern Front. According to Ukrainian and Western intelligence sources, these attacks were not isolated incidents. They were the beginning of a systematic campaign to cripple Russia's war machine from the inside out. On August 29th, a massive explosion tore through the unmanned aerial vehicle distribution center in Donetsk, the very heart of Russia's drone warfare infrastructure. 3 weeks later, on September 18th, another detonation thundered across Luhansk, leveling the ammunition depot of the 17th Tank Regiment of the 70th Motorized Rifle Division. Satellite imagery reviewed by Reuters and BBC Verify confirmed the destruction-blackened craters where the depots once stood. Debris spread across hundreds of meters, and secondary explosions continuing for hours. These were not symbolic strikes. They were surgical amputations of Russia's ability to see and strike. The Donetsk site was not just a warehouse. It was the nerve center coordinating roughly 19,000 drones, everything from reconnaissance platforms to kamikaze UAVs. Every artillery correction, every reconnaissance sweep, every drone-guided missile along the Eastern Front depended on this hub. When it burned, Russian soldiers lost their eyes in the sky. It's as if the entire Donetsk sector suddenly went blind, a Ukrainian defense source told Defense News. The attack sent shockwaves through Russia's command network, forcing commanders to rely on outdated reconnaissance and risking entire battalions moving blind into Ukrainian ambushes. Meanwhile, in Luhansk, the destruction of the ammunition depot silenced the thunder of Russian artillery that had dominated the region for months. Analysts from Jane's Defense Weekly reported that the facility stored thousands of 125mm tank shells Grad and Tornado G rockets, RPGs, and high-explosive artillery rounds, enough to sustain offensive operations for at least 90 days. The entire arsenal was reduced to ash within minutes. The inferno was so intense that thermal sensors aboard U.S. reconnaissance satellites registered heat signatures rivaling those of small volcanic eruptions. The precision of both strikes astonished Western observers. According to NATO sources cited by DW, Ukrainian forces combined real-time partisan intelligence with advanced ISR intelligence surveillance reconnaissance support from Allied systems including American and British satellites. This marked a shift from localized drone raids to deep penetration strategic warfare. Ukraine demonstrated the kind of operational sophistication that even NATO air forces trained for years to perfect, noted a retired British air marshal quoted by The Guardian. The immediate consequences were catastrophic for Moscow. With thousands of drones obliterated and millions of rounds of ammunition lost, Russia's frontline forces began to experience critical shortages within days. Field reports showed artillery units rationing shells, drone units grounding flights, and tank crews forced to reposition defensively rather than attack. For the first time since the invasion began, Russian field logistics broke down on a regional scale. When logistics fail, armies collapse, said Colonel Marcus Reisner of the Austrian Armed Forces in an interview with DW. His assessment echoed a growing Western consensus: Russia's vast but brittle war infrastructure was cracking under pressure. The economic toll mirrored the battlefield devastation. Estimates from Reuters suggest that replacing the destroyed equipment could cost Moscow between $500 million and $700 million, a staggering blow amid sanctions and declining oil revenues. President Trump's administration, according to sources within the Pentagon, viewed these strikes as proof that sustained Western intelligence support was paying off, though the White House refrained from direct comment. The message to Moscow was clear. No rear area is safe, no depot untouchable. Beyond the statistics, there was symbolism. The Donetsk and Luhansk explosions represented more than military setbacks. They shattered Russia's illusion of strategic depth. For months, Russian commanders had considered these territories secure comfortably beyond Ukraine's reach. But the new long-range drone swarms, some reportedly traveling over 400 kilometers, proved otherwise. Al Jazeera analysts described the strikes as a turning point in the psychological war eroding Russian morale, and signaling that Kiev could now hit the Kremlin's lifelines at will. Western defense circles immediately began debating the implications. Could this signal the beginning of a Ukrainian shift toward total attrition, targeting logistics, rather than territory? Experts from the Royal United Services Institute (RUSI) argued that Kiev's new doctrine mirrored the Allied air campaigns of World War II, aimed at dismantling industrial capacity before launching major offensives. NATO planners reportedly applauded the efficiency of the strikes, calling them textbook hybrid warfare, intelligence-led, precision-focused, and cost-effective. Yet amid the rubble, questions multiplied. How would the Kremlin respond? Would Moscow retaliate with deeper missile strikes on Ukrainian cities, or would it tighten air defenses around occupied territories, diverting resources from the front? Analysts warned that Russia's leadership now faced a grim dilemma: defend its rear or sustain its offensive in the east. Both could not be done simultaneously. This 1-2 blow, Donetsk and Luhansk, was not just a tactical victory. It was an announcement Ukraine had evolved. It now possessed the intelligence network, drone technology, and Western coordination to strike at the heart of Russia's war machine. It's no longer about holding lines, said a former NATO logistics officer to Reuters. It's about dismantling the opponent's ability to fight at all. As smoke still rose over the ruins, Russian state media struggled to control the narrative. Telegram channels linked to pro-Kremlin bloggers flooded with confusion and disbelief. Some accused internal sabotage. Others claimed Western missiles disguised as drones. But none could hide the scale of the disaster. Even Russian soldiers on the front lines began referring to the night Russia went blind. If such precision strikes could happen twice in 3 weeks, how many more could follow before Russia's entire eastern front begins to unravel? How can a resistance movement, armed only with cell phones, outsmart one of the world's largest armies? The answer lies in Ukraine's invisible network of eyes and ears that stretched deep into occupied territory, an intricate blend of human courage and cutting-edge Western technology. This was not a random drone strike. It was the result of one of the most complex intelligence operations of the war so far. It began months before the explosions in Donetsk and Luhansk. Small cells of Ukrainian partisans, members of the Tesh resistance movement, risked everything to operate behind enemy lines. These men and women worked as mechanics, truck drivers, shopkeepers, even janitors inside Russian-controlled facilities. Their mission was simple yet perilous: observe, record, and report. Using inconspicuous cell phones, they counted trucks entering depots, noted the types of crates being unloaded, and filmed nighttime movements. Each whisper, each video clip was encrypted and transmitted through secure channels to Ukrainian military intelligence (GUR). According to BBC News and Defense Express, this network of partisans was augmented by NATO's signals intelligence systems, what experts call the second layer of ISR. US and British listening stations, including assets in Poland and Romania, intercepted Russian military radio traffic, tracking the digital pulse of the front. Whenever a convoy moved, its chatter left a trail. These fragments were then triangulated by Ukrainian analysts, who cross-referenced them with partisan data. It's a mosaic, explained a retired U.S. cyber intelligence officer quoted by Reuters. Each piece by itself is useless, but together they form a map more precise than any spy satellite. That satellite layer, the third eye, was perhaps the most crucial. High-resolution imagery from Western partners, reportedly including the U.S. National Reconnaissance Office and the EU's Copernicus program, offered real-time visuals of the suspected targets. Analysts at Ukraine's main intelligence directorate used AI-assisted pattern recognition software to detect unusual activity. According to The Guardian, increased nighttime truck traffic thermal signatures from machinery and new defensive trenches around the Donetsk facility were identified weeks before the strike. It was proof that the site wasn't a warehouse. It was a vital logistics hub disguised as one. The coordination between partisan ground intelligence and Western satellite assets marked a turning point in the conflict. It blurred the line between traditional espionage and modern data-driven warfare. NATO insiders told DW that Ukraine's success was a demonstration of 21st-century networked warfare, where mobile phones, satellites, and algorithms operate as one weapon system. A Pentagon source described it as the most efficient marriage of human and technical intelligence since the Gulf War. In Moscow, the Kremlin had long underestimated these capabilities. Russian counterintelligence forces had grown complacent, focusing more on propaganda than on counter-sabotage. Al Jazeera reported that the FSB failed to detect dozens of small resistance cells embedded in civilian industries across occupied Donetsk and Luhansk. They were looking for spies with cameras, noted one analyst, but in this war, every smartphone became a satellite terminal. This intelligence ecosystem extended far beyond Ukraine's borders. Western cyber agencies monitored Russian logistics chatter through undersea cable intercepts and airborne early warning platforms like NATO's RQ-4 Global Hawk. These systems, circling high above the Black Sea, relayed encrypted feeds to command centers in Kiev and Warsaw. From there, Ukrainian planners built the full operational picture: what to hit, when, and how. The operation also underscored President Trump's administration's evolving posture. While avoiding direct engagement, Washington authorized expanded intelligence sharing under what Defense News called a real-time ISR bridge, allowing Ukrainian analysts to access filtered reconnaissance data within minutes rather than hours. The results were immediate, unprecedented accuracy and timing. A senior NATO official admitted anonymously to Reuters that Ukraine now sees the battlefield almost as clearly as we do. The human cost of such coordination was heavy. Several partisans reportedly disappeared in the weeks following the strikes, presumed captured or executed by Russian forces. Their sacrifice, however, may have changed the trajectory of the war. Without their local confirmations, the high-tech apparatus would have been blind to ground reality. This integration of human intelligence and digital surveillance has forced a complete rethink of Russia's defensive strategy. The Kremlin has since begun fortifying rear depots with radar domes and camouflage nets, moving some assets deeper into its territory. But experts question the effectiveness of these efforts. Once your enemy can see through your camouflage, the game changes, said Dr. Jack Watling of RUSI. Russia is defending against an opponent that can literally see the heat of its engines from space. Moreover, the intelligence chain revealed another hidden battlefield: cyberspace. As Reuters uncovered, Ukraine's security services used malware to penetrate internal Russian logistics systems, giving them access to shipment schedules and fuel inventory reports. This allowed planners to pinpoint when the depots were at maximum capacity, the perfect moment for destruction. The implications of this operation are profound. It showcased not only Ukraine's ingenuity, but also NATO's silent involvement, a coordinated intelligence symphony, blending grassroots resistance with orbital precision. It was a new kind of warfare where the most decisive weapons are no longer tanks or missiles, but data streams and encrypted signals. As the world absorbed the shock of these revelations, one question began to echo across defense circles. If Ukraine could achieve this level of penetration in Donetsk and Luhansk, what other invisible hands might already be mapping Russia's deeper secrets? What happens when a country without a Navy-Air Force superiority or vast missile stockpiles manages to pierce the defenses of a global military power? The answer arrived in the form of a silent glowing swarm racing through the night sky over eastern Ukraine. The operation that destroyed Russia's Donetsk drone hub and Luhansk ammunition depot was not just an intelligence success, it was a masterclass in modern asymmetric warfare. In the hours leading up to the strikes, Ukrainian planners orchestrated what military analysts now call a multi-wave autonomous attack. The goal was not only to hit, but to overwhelm. At 1:47 a.m., dozens of decoy drones, cheap, improvised, and sometimes built from commercial parts, took off in waves. Their sole purpose was to trigger Russia's air defense systems, forcing the powerful S-300 and Pantsir batteries to reveal their radar signatures. As missiles streaked skyward, Ukrainian electronic warfare operators jammed Russian targeting systems using high-frequency bursts, confusing friend and foe alike. Only after this digital fog spread did the real killers emerge. The second wave consisted of heavy kamikaze UAVs modified from Ukraine's long-range Beaver and UJ-22 airborne series. These were not the hobby drones seen on social media. They were precision weapons with ranges exceeding 400 kilometers, capable of carrying warheads between 20 and 50 kilograms. Each drone was equipped with inertial navigation systems resistant to GPS jamming and onboard thermal sensors to identify targets through camouflage. According to Defense News, this technological leap placed Ukraine's drone arsenal in the same category as Israel's Harop loitering munition, renowned for its fire-and-forget autonomy. When these Ukrainian UAVs struck, they did so from multiple vectors simultaneously. Eyewitnesses in occupied Donetsk described a metallic rain followed by a series of chain explosions that lasted nearly half an hour. Video verified by BBC Verify showed fireballs erupting in sequence, an indication of internal detonations spreading from one warehouse section to another. Analysts compared the footage to the aftermath of the U.S. precision strike on the Shayrat airbase in Syria, emphasizing the sophistication behind Ukraine's targeting algorithms. Russia's air defense response was chaotic. Their systems were not built for saturation attacks, explained retired German Colonel Ralph Thiele in an interview with DW. When dozens of autonomous drones approach from different altitudes, each emitting false signals, even the best radar cannot track them all. The result was an embarrassing failure. Russia fired more than 30 surface-to-air missiles, most at phantom targets, while the real strike force passed through the gaps. In Luhansk, the tactics grew even more refined. Ukrainian engineers had pre-programmed drones to exploit the depot's structural vulnerabilities. Thermal analysis indicated that ventilation shafts and reinforced doors were the weakest entry points. Once breached, the interior detonated like a pressurized bomb. NATO observers cited the attack as an example of smart munitions warfare, where inexpensive drones achieved the destructive effect of multi-million-dollar missiles. But the brilliance of the operation went beyond technology. It was psychological warfare by design. Ukrainian planners knew that the sudden appearance of autonomous swarms over Russian-controlled skies would cause panic far beyond the battlefield. Within hours, Russian social media was flooded with terrified reports of ghost drones and invisible attacks. As one pro-Kremlin blogger admitted, "If our air defense cannot stop these, then nowhere is safe." According to Jane's Defense Weekly, Ukraine has adopted what Western strategists call the cost exchange strategy. The idea is simple: force the enemy to spend exponentially more to defend against your cheaper attacks. Each Ukrainian kamikaze drone cost roughly $30,000, $50,000. while a single Russian interceptor missile from the S-300 system costs up to $1 million. By this calculation, even failed drone strikes bleed the Russian economy faster than any artillery duel. Behind the scenes, NATO logistics quietly supported this transformation. The New York Times reported that under President Trump, the U.S. approved a new intelligence sharing framework, allowing allied defense companies to advise Ukrainian drone manufacturers on non-lethal technologies like flight stabilization, signal encryption, and composite materials. This loophole avoided direct weapon transfer, but dramatically increased performance. The result: drones that could glide hundreds of kilometers under the radar and strike with surgical precision. Russian attempts to jam or intercept the swarm largely failed because of Ukraine's adaptive algorithmic control, a self-correcting AI system capable of changing frequencies and flight paths mid-mission. Western experts have likened this to a distributed brain in the sky. "We're watching the democratization of air power," said Samuel Bendit, a senior analyst at the Center for Naval Analyses. "Ukraine is showing how software, not size, defines who wins modern wars." Still, the scale of destruction caught even Kyiv by surprise. Satellite analysis from Reuters showed that 80% of the Donetsk drone depot was obliterated, while the secondary explosions in Luhansk registered seismic activity equivalent to a magnitude 2.1 earthquake. In less than 10 minutes, months of Russian production vanished. The financial blow exceeded $500 million, but the symbolic impact was greater. Russia's aura of invincibility had been pierced by machines no larger than a compact car. The ripple effects reached beyond the battlefield. Western analysts observed a sudden spike in Russian requests for Iranian Shahed components, indicating that domestic drone production had been crippled. "They're scrambling," reported Al Jazeera's defense correspondent. "Factories in Kazan and Ulyanovsk are switching to 24-hour shifts, but without imported optics and chips, output will remain minimal." For Ukraine, this victory represented a new stage of war, a war fought less by manpower and more by math. The algorithmic efficiency of these drone swarms turned Russia's size into a liability. Every depot, refinery, or command post became a potential target. Every missile fired in panic drained Moscow's reserves further. As the smoke settled, Ukrainian military intelligence celebrated not with triumph, but with quiet determination. They knew this was just the beginning. The swarm, one officer told Defense Express, is not a single weapon. It's a doctrine. If this doctrine can evolve faster than Russia can adapt, could the skies over Moscow itself soon darken with the hum of Ukraine's mechanical wasps? How do you measure the true cost of a war? For Russia, it isn't just the loss of soldiers, it's the billions of rubles reduced to dust in one night. The twin Ukrainian strikes on Donetsk and Luhansk didn't just destroy equipment. They set fire to the foundation of Moscow's entire military-industrial strategy. The result was a spectacular economic hemorrhage that continues to spread through Russia's war economy today. When the Donetsk drone distribution center was annihilated, Ukraine didn't just eliminate a warehouse, it destroyed the beating heart of Russia's drone production pipeline. That facility supplied thousands of FPV and reconnaissance drones to nearly every frontline battalion. Analysts from Reuters calculated that roughly 19,000 unmanned vehicles ranging from basic surveillance units to high-end kamikaze models were stored there. Even conservative estimates place their combined material value between $95 million and $190 million. But the real figure is likely higher. Many of the drones were equipped with imported optics and thermal sensors sourced through clandestine channels from China, Turkey, and Iran. Defense News revealed that most of these systems depended on Western-made components like microprocessors, camera lenses, and lithium-ion cells, all of which are now under strict export control. Every destroyed drone meant months of procurement delays through black markets. It's not just equipment they lost, said Dr. Patrick Berry, a defense expert with the University of Bath. It's time, and in modern warfare, time is blood. The Luhansk ammunition depot's destruction was an even deadlier blow. According to Jane's Defense Weekly, the facility stored over 6,000 tank shells, 20,000 rocket munitions, and hundreds of tons of small arms ammunition. It wasn't merely a supply node. It was a regional arsenal feeding 4 Russian brigades. The explosions created mushroom clouds visible from 40 kilometers away, while secondary detonations continued for 12 hours. Satellite images analyzed by BBC Verify revealed that the entire complex, equivalent in size to 15 football fields, was reduced to scorched earth. Replacing that stockpile is a logistical nightmare. Russia's domestic arms factories, already stretched to maximum capacity, cannot replenish such losses quickly. The Financial Times reported that Moscow's production of artillery shells dropped by nearly 30% in 2025 due to sanctions on imported machine tools and raw materials. Even with President Trump's administration tightening global trade enforcement, Russia has increasingly relied on Iran and North Korea for supplies. Pyongyang's recent shipments of 150 million shells and rockets may fill some gaps, but experts from the Royal United Services Institute warn that these munitions are inconsistent and often defective. You can't win a war with unreliable ammunition, said RUSI researcher Dr. Jack Watling. The economic damage extends beyond the battlefield. Rebuilding the destroyed depots could cost Russia an estimated 600 to 700 million. But more critically, every ruble diverted to military reconstruction is a ruble stolen from the civilian economy. Inflation has surged above 14%, the ruble has hit record lows, and energy revenues, long the backbone of the Kremlin's war budget, have plummeted after repeated Ukrainian drone attacks on oil refineries. A recent Al Jazeera investigation noted that over 38% of Russia's refining capacity has been disrupted since late summer due to targeted strikes in Ryazan, Samara, and Nizhny Novgorod. The chain reaction is devastating. Fuel shortages slow logistics, production costs rise, and domestic prices soar. Moscow's attempts to control inflation by freezing energy exports have angered European customers, deepening Russia's isolation. Meanwhile, the Kremlin's propaganda machine tries to downplay the crisis, claiming record defense output. But leaked data obtained by The Guardian suggests that up to 40% of newly manufactured drones fail quality checks due to lack of imported parts. The illusion of strength masks an industrial collapse in progress. There's also the human cost of this economic war. With so many factories diverted to military production, civilian industries are collapsing. In cities like Yekaterinburg and Chelyabinsk, consumer goods shortages have led to sporadic protests, rare but telling signs of public frustration. Russian economists speaking anonymously to Reuters warn that the Kremlin's guns over butter policy is unsustainable. You can run a war economy on adrenaline, said one analyst, but not forever. Eventually, you run out of blood to pump. Within the Russian military itself, the mood has darkened. Soldiers on the front lines now complain of ammunition, rationing sometimes as few as 5 shells per day for artillery crews that once fired 50. Drone units have been reduced to scavenging commercial drones and attaching improvised explosives. DW reported that morale is collapsing even among elite units as logistics falter. The war is eating its own supply chain, noted their defense correspondent. Western intelligence agencies see a deeper strategic opportunity. The US and NATO now assess that continued precision strikes against Russian logistical hubs could accelerate systemic collapse. A classified NATO briefing leaked to Reuters described Ukraine's new campaign as economically asymmetric warfare, a strategy designed not to conquer territory, but to bankrupt the enemy into submission. It's a modern echo of the Reagan-era doctrine that forced the Soviet Union into ruin through overextension and unsustainable military spending. President Trump's administration has publicly applauded Ukraine's resilience while quietly pressuring European allies to increase drone and ammunition funding. In a recent joint statement, the Pentagon emphasized strategic cost imposition, a term referring to forcing adversaries to spend exponentially more to defend than Ukraine spends to attack. For every drone that costs Ukraine $30,000, Russia spends $1 million to shoot it down or replace the destroyed equipment. It is a war of attrition in which economics, not artillery, decides the winner. But behind this grim calculus lies a haunting question. How long can Russia keep replacing ashes with rubles before the system itself burns out? What happens when the rear becomes the front line? In today's Russia, even hundreds of kilometers from the battlefield, fear has become a daily companion. The devastating Ukrainian strikes on Donetsk and Luhansk didn't just obliterate hardware, they shattered the illusion of safety that once protected Russia's vast logistics network. For thousands of workers, engineers, and soldiers, the war has suddenly come home. In the aftermath of the attacks, morale inside Russian logistics units plummeted. Those who once saw themselves as far from combat now realized they were sitting atop live bombs. As Reuters reported, Russian supply officers across Donetsk, Belgorod, and Kursk began refusing assignments to ammunition depots, citing psychological exhaustion and fear of drone strikes. Within weeks, the Kremlin's own military police confirmed a spike in desertions and absences without leave among logistics troops, something unseen since the first chaotic months of the invasion. They know they're not safe anywhere, said a European intelligence source quoted by DW. The psychological impact spread beyond the military. In cities like Rostov-on-Don and Voronezh, where supply convoys assemble before heading to the front, local civilians have started petitioning for warehouses to be moved away from residential areas. BBC News obtained leaked messages from a local government group describing mass panic during nightly air raid alerts. One resident wrote, "We used to think only soldiers died. Now we all live under the drones." This shift in perception marks one of Ukraine's greatest intangible victories, the transformation of Russia's rear zones into zones of anxiety. Every mechanic refueling a truck, every crane operator unloading crates, every factory worker welding a drone frame now operates under constant dread. The Kremlin's extensive propaganda machine has failed to contain the fear. Telegram channels affiliated with the Russian Ministry of Defense flood with denial and bravado. Yet even pro-Kremlin bloggers admit the truth: rear bases are no longer safe havens. Western intelligence analysts see this as part of Ukraine's broader psychological strategy. According to Jane's Defense, weekly Ukrainian planners have deliberately targeted symbolic logistics nodes rather than just tactical ones. Destroying an ammo depot weakens combat power, wrote the publication, but destroying confidence in safety destroys production. This is the new invisible front of warfare, one fought not with bullets, but with fear. Inside the Russian command structure, the atmosphere has grown toxic. Leaked intercepts obtained by Al Jazeera reveal shouting matches between regional commanders and Moscow's general staff. Officers complain of being blamed for failures beyond their control, while shortages of replacement drones, munitions, and manpower deepen the chaos. The word most often heard in those calls, according to analysts, panic. Compounding the crisis is the erosion of trust between soldiers and their superiors. When a drone depot can vanish overnight, troops question whether their commanders can protect them at all. Every blast is a message, said former NATO intelligence officer, Colonel Hamish de Breton-Gordon, in an interview with The Guardian. It says your generals can't shield you, your bunkers can't save you, and your homeland is shrinking. The Kremlin's response has been to tighten discipline rather than address morale. Reports from Reuters confirm that new laws passed in Moscow impose harsher penalties for defeatist behavior, including up to 10 years in prison for soldiers caught spreading false information about drone attacks. Yet repression cannot erase fear, it only drives it underground. Even the once loyal state television channels have quietly reduced footage from the front, fearing that images of destruction could erode domestic support further. This unraveling morale has direct military consequences. According to Defense News, several Russian artillery brigades in the Luhansk sector have been ordered to scale back operations due to lack of drone reconnaissance and growing crew anxiety. Without accurate targeting data, Russian gunners are now firing blind. Civilian truck drivers contracted to deliver supplies increasingly refuse to enter active zones, forcing the army to use untrained soldiers as drivers, a decision that has led to numerous accidents and lost cargo. The fear extends even to Russia's industrial base. Engineers in drone manufacturing plants across Kazan, Ulyanovsk, and Nizhny Tagil have begun working shorter shifts, demanding hazard pay and additional security. A leaked report cited by the Moscow Times revealed that factory output dropped by 22% in September 2025, primarily due to labor instability and fear of sabotage or external attack. The Ministry of Defense has quietly deployed Rosgvardia units paramilitary guards to protect strategic sites. Yet experts warn that the presence of armed guards only fuels paranoia among workers. Western think tanks have taken note of this new psychological theater of war. The Center for Strategic and International Studies (CSIS) in Washington called Ukraine's deep strikes a masterclass in cognitive warfare. Their recent paper explained that the objective is not to kill thousands, but to make millions feel unsafe. When a mechanic in Tula or a truck driver in Belgorod feels the same fear as a soldier in Bakhmut, the report concluded the war has already expanded without firing another shot. President Trump's administration has reportedly encouraged NATO partners to study this Ukrainian model as a case study in low-cost deterrence. By combining drones, intelligence, and psychological operations, Ukraine has achieved what decades of conventional warfighting doctrine rarely delivered, breaking the enemy's will to fight without total destruction. And inside Russia, that psychological fracture is spreading upward. The families of logistics workers now beg their sons and daughters to quit or transfer. Military recruiters struggle to fill rear echelon roles. The Kremlin's once proud defense industry, once a symbol of security, is now viewed as a death trap. For the first time since the war began, Russia's collapse may not come from the front, but from the fear eating it alive from behind. But as morale crumbles and fear spreads, one critical question now looms: if Russia's rear is collapsing, what happens when the front begins to fold as well? What if the collapse of an empire begins not with a battle, but with a silence? That silence, the sudden absence of artillery drones and logistical movement, now hangs over Russia's eastern front. Following the annihilation of the Donetsk drone hub and the Luhansk ammunition depot, analysts from Reuters and Jane's Defense Weekly warn that a massive gap has formed within Moscow's frontline structure. The once steady flow of supplies has faltered, leaving units stranded blind and undersupplied. For the first time in months, Ukrainian troops are advancing not because of firepower, but because the enemy has none left to fire. Satellite imagery and intercepted radio traffic confirm what NATO intelligence calls a logistical vacuum. Russian units along the Kupiansk-Svatov line have reported rationing artillery shells, with some brigades receiving barely 15% of their normal resupply. According to DW tank regiments that once deployed 40 operational T-72B3s, now field fewer than 10 combat-ready vehicles due to fuel and shell shortages. It's the kind of structural paralysis that precedes collapse, said former NATO logistics officer Ben Hodges. A front doesn't fall all at once, it rots from within one supply route at a time. The strategic implications are enormous. Ukraine now faces a rare window of opportunity, the chance to drive a wedge directly through the weakened Russian front. Western observers describe this as a potential encirclement pivot. If Kyiv can exploit the hollowed center of the Donbas line, it could split Russian forces into two isolated pockets, one toward Luhansk, the other toward Mariupol. Such a maneuver would not only reclaim territory, but trap thousands of Russian troops cut off from resupply. Moscow knows this and is scrambling to respond. The Kremlin has begun pulling reserves from other sectors, particularly from the southern Zaporizhzhia and Melitopol fronts, to patch the hole. However, this comes at a severe cost. It's the classic blanket problem, explained defense analyst Gustav Gressel, to The Guardian: pull to cover one side and you expose another. Every battalion transferred east leaves a new vulnerability somewhere else. And each of those convoys must now traverse hundreds of kilometers under the watchful eye of Ukrainian reconnaissance and Western satellites. That is where the second phase of Ukraine's strategy begins. According to Defense News, Ukrainian forces are already striking those reinforcements in transit. HIMARS Storm Shadow and ATACMS missiles, guided by real-time US and NATO intelligence, have begun targeting Russian troop trains and fuel convoys as they move toward the gap. They're fighting a war of interception, said Dr. Marina Miron of King's College London. Before Russia can plug the hole, Ukraine keeps widening it. Meanwhile, the geopolitical consequences are reverberating far beyond the battlefield. President Trump's administration has reportedly intensified pressure on NATO members to accelerate ammunition production and coordinate long-range strike intelligence. The war's tempo has shifted, said a Pentagon source to Reuters. It's not about defensive aid anymore, it's about strategic exhaustion. In Brussels, NATO planners privately acknowledge that Ukraine's strikes have accomplished something Western air forces could not achieve without escalation: the dismantling of Russia's deep logistics under the threshold of open NATO involvement. For Russia, the nightmare scenario is already unfolding. A report by Al Jazeera described a growing logistics triangle of collapse, stretching from Belgorod in the north to Donetsk in the east and Luhansk in the south. Within this zone, depots lie in ruins, supply routes are under constant attack, and electronic warfare systems are overextended. Russian commanders, forced into reaction mode, can no longer dictate the tempo of war. They've become reactive, not proactive, noted BBC's defense analyst Frank Gardner. Every Ukrainian strike forces them to repair rather than advance. And as the war economy bleeds, the internal political strain on Moscow intensifies. Regional governors, once confident of Kremlin support, now face protests over destroyed fuel facilities and power shortages. In Kursk and Belgorod, local administrations have begun constructing makeshift bunkers, visible symbols that the rear is no longer safe. Western intelligence suggests that the Kremlin's elite units, including the 1st Guards Tank Army, have been redeployed to internal security roles, rather than the front, revealing a leadership more concerned with domestic unrest than battlefield success. Within NATO circles, the mood has turned from cautious optimism to strategic calculation. European leaders, particularly in Berlin and Warsaw, now openly discuss how Ukraine's offensive momentum could redefine the continent's defense posture. If Ukraine can break Russia's eastern spine, said DW analyst Matthias Koch, it will permanently shift NATO's eastern frontier, not through treaties, but through exhaustion. But the question remains, how long can this momentum last? Even as Ukraine gains ground, it faces its own logistical pressures, drone losses, ammunition shortages, and the ever-present fatigue of a drawn-out war. Yet under Trump's White House, Washington continues to emphasize sustainable dominance, helping Ukraine maintain pressure without direct U.S. troop involvement. Defense analysts predict that by early winter, the combination of economic collapse, morale decay, and persistent Ukrainian strikes could force Russia into a strategic retreat. Still, no one expects the Kremlin to concede easily. Russian defense factories have switched to a wartime footing, operating non-stop, while propaganda networks promise a massive counteroffensive. But even these narratives sound increasingly hollow. Every new depot rebuilt risks being struck again. Every promise of revenge is met with another explosion in the night. In the words of a retired U.S. general interviewed by Reuters, Russia's army isn't losing because Ukraine is stronger. It's losing because it's bleeding out faster than it can heal. And so, as smoke still rises from the ruins of Donetsk and Luhansk, the battlefield enters a new phase, a war where silence speaks louder than explosions. The question haunting Moscow tonight is no longer if its front will break, but when. If that moment comes, will Russia fight to hold its crumbling line? Or will it finally face the weight of a war it can no longer afford to sustain?